Man in Gray here with another Man in Gray book review. Today's book is A Fire Story by Brian Fies, published in 2021 by Henry Abrams. It's 154 pages. Brian Fies is a cartoonist. He and his wife Karen once lived in a nice home in Napa County in northern California. But at 1 a.m. on the night of October, or the morning of October 9th, 2017, Karen awoke to the smell of smoke. When the two of them got up and looked outside, they saw a massive wall of fire headed toward their house. They just had enough time to stash a few valuables and their pets in their car before escaping. When they were finally allowed back into the neighborhood days later, they found that their house was completely gone. It had been burned down to its foundation. Not only their house, but all the houses in their neighborhood were wiped out, except, ironically, for a Starbucks, which somehow survived the fire. The series of fires that burned Northern California in October of 2017 wound up destroying over 6,000 homes and killing 44 people. At the time, it was the worst fire in California's history. Uh, Brian and his wife stayed for a time in their twin daughter's home while they sorted out their lives. And he decided to draw a comic of the fire and what had happened to them. So, using donated markers and paper, he drew an 18-page comic. And then, using his daughter's computer, he scanned these illustrations into the computer and posted it online. And within a week, 500,000 people had viewed the comic. He began getting hundreds and then thousands of emails from people all over the world wanting to know how he and his wife were doing and what the situation was. So that inspired Fies to expand his little comic into a full-length graphic nonfiction book, which is what this is. The fire itself is only dealt with in the first part of the book. The most of the book deals with the aftermath of the grief they felt for losing all their possessions and the bureaucracy they had to deal with to repair everything, and then the decision they had to make about whether to move or whether to rebuild their house in the same location. One of the most touching pages in this book is this one that says, things I will never see again, where he lists all these possessions that they had, some from their parents and grandparents that were all destroyed in the fire because they simply had no time or the capacity to save anything. He not only tells his story, he tells the story of a number of other their neighbors who also lost homes in the fire. Some of whom decided to stay. Here's a neighbor named Dottie. Uh, he has these little one-page stories that tell what happened to their home and whether they decided to leave or not. Some people decided they couldn't take it; it was too painful to try to rebuild there, and others were determined to rebuild. He goes through a lot of detail about the steps they had to go through afterwards. Getting on the phone and calling the electric company and all the other utilities and canceling their accounts and trying to get money and trying to track down their mail because, of course, all the post office boxes, all their mailboxes had been burned out, and so they didn't know where their mail was. Then they had to deal with the county, and the federal government's um, help filling out paperwork to try to get loans and grants and stuff. One of the things he talks about is how the disaster pulled everybody together because everybody lost their homes. Rich people, poor people, middle class people, they were all, as he said, the fire was an equal opportunity destroyer. And so it brought all these people together. Then they had to go through the process of deciding what to do. It ends hopefully, though. The book does end in a kind of hopeful note. They go back to the burned out site and they're sifting through the ashes trying to find stuff. And they do find a few possessions that managed to survive the fire. And they do decide to rebuild their house. They move into a rental house out in the country, and there's a kind of half sad, half comic scene where they smell smoke, and he gets in his car to drive around, try to find out where the smoke is, and turns out there's a neighbor burning trash in a 55-gallon drum because they're out in a rural area where it's legal to do that. It's legal for people to burn their trash. And so he's just burning trash, but they're so traumatized by the smell of smoke that every time they smell smoke, they fear there's another fire coming. The book also talks a little bit about the science of fire and why the fire was so destructive in this particular neighborhood, and the role that global climate change is playing in the intensity of fires. And since this book came out, there's been other fires in California that have been even more destructive than this one. So if you're interested in graphic novels, this is an interesting book because it's a nonfiction book told in a graphic format. And it's very touching. Telling Free's story and the story of all these other people who lost everything they had through no fault of their own. It wasn't their fault that this fire came through and just wiped everything out. So if you're interested in graphic novels, graphic nonfiction novels, or if you're fascinated by the idea of fire, or if you've seen Free's online comic and you want to learn more, you may want to read this book. The book is A Fire Story. The author is Brian Fries. This has been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.